on secrecy, meaning, and identity. This is video number 2. I have learned many things from my prior video exploring why I create what I want to make, and how I want to keep making these videos. These videos are more of a discussion, or a monologue than anything else, trying to explore ideas. I wish to create some form of understanding and elaborate on ideas by meditating on them. This is me sharing part of myself, sharing my thoughts on ideas with everybody else. As an outline for this video, I'm going to start with a preface, explain my rationale, the goals, my updates, and my reason for making this. I'm going to explore my actions, decisions I've made, and the purpose for my channel and the video. Generally, more personal stuff. After that, the subject itself. Secrecy, meaning, and identity. Many of these subjects primarily relate to how I think about them and their relation to my own life. But I want to get more professional, if that's the right word, and start speaking more cogently and philosophically, exploring ideas in my own way. My last video, my first one, was a rather less coherent mess, and more so just me speaking on mind on whatever I wanted to talk about in the moment, letting things come to me, letting go of things, and learning to start something new. It was more a practice in letting go of my anger, my emotions, and my thoughts, any frustrations I might have had, and trying to think about the future in some way. This is more of a focus on the subject. So, after the discussion of the subject itself, I will discuss my art, my practices, my thoughts on the drawing, and my final thoughts on the subject and my artwork, how I'm feeling. And so to preface this monologue or discussion, let me give you some background. It's been 3 months since my last recording. Things have changed. I would like to clarify my purpose once more, to justify why I'm making what I make. Why do I do what I do? This self-examination will allow me to understand myself more deeply, and perhaps answer questions with more self-awareness. So, what is my purpose with this channel and my actions? In the first video, I stated it to be an expression of myself, revive my passion for art, but also to critically examine life, to renew passion and meaning into the work I do. The latter, to examine life, is a Pandora's box that has consumed my life since. The examination of life. It is so incredibly vast, complicated of an issue to unpack and understand the nuance of. I wonder why I even bother examining life in the first place. I have been relatively mindless, or otherwise focused on my tasks in the past, very practical, with no delusions of thought or philosophy, no distractions. I was focused on my task, my goals, my very specific way of getting to these goals and the practicing that I can do. I was focused on the application of ideas, but I wasn't focused on ideas themselves. The culminating spiral of this change in my life since the first video and all my thoughts that inundated and overwhelmed my mind in all aspects for these months. I have felt a cataclysm, a complete shift and restructuring of my thoughts, that I feel I am a new person now that I have picked up what was left from the rubble. I suppose I have achieved that goal, to express myself for the first time in such a way that felt purposeful and unique and truly authentic, as haphazard as it might have been, rough, unpolished, unstructured, yet it was still sufficient in my mind to strike a fire and ignite the tinder within me. My passion for art. Just as strong as it has ever been, but absent in practice because of a lack of time committed to it. In some ways, creating art is a luxury. Seeking examination of life is not a luxury, but a necessity. That is the shift that I have made. I do not want to seek to do artwork out of habit, because of some form of productivity, or because I'm focused on tasks and specifically getting to a certain goal, but because I am driven, just enough at the right moment, to create something worthwhile. Otherwise, in a state of mindlessness, focus on tasks and productivity, and the quality of the work degraded substantially and beyond repair. It is, or it has been, damaging to habitually think and stress over creation itself through the phrasing and terms of productive or non-productive means. Creating my artwork, whatever it may be, is contingent upon myself. It occupies a significant portion of my mind. The mind is very strange. In one moment, rational, logical, and on the other, consumed by the will. The emotions, desires, fleeting thoughts, and animal instincts that have been supplanted into the unconscious, whether as a matter of the environment, because of the nature of the will itself, the driving force. I am working to master my own will, rationally pursue and manage the unconscious, so it is made clearly understood, acknowledged, and acted upon in a rational way, to tame the beast within me, rather than pursue this will to my own downfall or death. I have been thinking about life and death, for I would say my entire life, but recently as well. The reason and purpose behind humanity in all things. I have been examining life itself, just as I set out to do. Ultimately, I have chosen to pursue truth, knowledge, and understanding, a very dangerous and perhaps seen by society as the least fruitful of endeavors humanity might choose. Truth is often overtaken with lies easily, as humanity falters upon ignorance and the acceptance of falsehoods. In this instance, truth is not truth, it is the status quo. So the truth may yet be impossible to determine fully. I do not believe it to be impossible or impractical. Knowledge, and the pursuit of it, while perhaps the circumstances transformed into power and mastery, also comes the great cost of its pursuit. To pursue knowledge for the sake of itself is often depicted as a trial, the great challenge to overcome. Those who seek it often suffer from either the knowledge itself or at great cost or peril. I seek understanding, I seek truth. Truths about myself and the knowledge of the world. I am more deeply examining my own thoughts than I have been most recently. This has made me more mindful of my own mind, my behavior, and my perception. It was a change I desperately needed to give me some sense of purpose. These videos will become a log, a journey, both artistically but also philosophically, an exploration into the truth of the mind. My philosophy. One day I will die. What greater a legacy to leave than the knowledge and ideas I have obtained throughout my life? To record them, catalog them, and preserve them, and develop them further than I have before. I will have left some sort of valuable creation behind. I hope, if not, at least learn from this exercise. This format is a more thorough exploration of ideas and myself than any piece of art I will ever produce. Most likely. This is my philosophy. These are my meditations on life. Perhaps it will assist me in finding reason and peace with my existence. I believe there to be a link between philosophy and the matters of the mind. With existence itself, and art, and imitation, a link between what is real and what is not, what connects life itself to what is beyond. For it is in art that lies a fundamental truth about life, one that philosophy often poorly chooses to explore, if not dismissed by philosophers altogether. Yet in stories, fables, literature, often it is in the most incredible works that represent or otherwise invent a new philosophy or capture the time or society was made in, representing an abstract idea or a new way of thinking about the world, if not thinking, a new way of viewing the world. Stories are art, and thinking is an art form. As a reiteration of my purpose here on YouTube in these videos, after some reflection on what matters to me, which I will constantly restate because I am still trying to figure it out myself, it is for this channel to be an expression of myself, represent my ideas, represent my passion for creativity, and my vow to making art. Hopefully, whatever I make can be a nice respite from the cancerous and corrupting nature of our media, or content that permeates all social medias and in the media itself we experience. I think I want to promote within myself and with others the importance of mindfulness and critical thinking. I'm making a monologue, insight and reflection on the world and my philosophy towards life. Art being an important part of my life that gives me a lot of meaning and value. The reason I made this effort and hopefully what will continue to inspire me in creating. I want to start this discussion about what art means in some sense, and why it is important to me. Art, to me, has always been associated with philosophy and my view towards life. I have always believed artists and creative individuals were the pinnacle of human expression and philosophical thought. Then I graduated school, moved away from the history books, and met actual artists, often a pathetic, a dull comparison to the artists of the past. As of modern times, artists and most people have become mules, slaves, sheep, seeking avarice, greed, and fame, to be blind towards life, envious of fate, and reliant on the world rather than themselves. Modern artists are blind to the unshaken ground, only to be some derivative, another commodity in a market. I suppose this goes for most modern thinking. To commodify ourselves, that I discussed previously. Our world of material things, marketplaces of wealth, sin, avarice, and seeking of fame. Very few artists see the world truly for what it is. Again, applicable to people as a whole, I suppose. I suppose that is why I seek to explore philosophy and awareness, push the bounds of my own limitations and thoughts, an exploration into the understanding of reality, truth, and just behavior in a sick world, just as art shapes our influences and perception of life itself. What we derive value and meaning. Art is something that I have made and always been fascinated with. Whether it was traditional drawings or canvas paintings, films, video games, and books. The media and entertainment we surround ourselves with, all of it is art and meaningful to us in some way. I always remember it being like a story, something that causes us to look at the world differently, open up to new perspectives and philosophies, whether in the craft itself or outside in our daily life. Often this appreciation for art will give us meaning. If we can look at something, reflect on it, and maybe understand something more about the world, or something more about ourselves. The power of art, that media, and the transformation of ideas into action and personal growth. Take inspiration, for example. To witness something and come up with a new idea often derived from it or inspired by it. That is a single effect of many. Various artworks seek to instill some effect, if not a direct emotional effect, a rational and logical appreciation for the craftsmanship or lack thereof. Regardless, I think the power of art, be it something like a comic book or a film, or stories or writings, it has power. Often it is art's power to captivate me that I find meaning in. A change in my perception, a new experience, a lesson learned, or in some cases media that I become attached to and identify with. Thus, the idea of identity. This identity, in some ways, forms meaning, or meaning is attached to certain identities. I do not know the answers yet, so I should begin, I suppose. On secrecy. Secrecy is the absence of knowledge or perception of it. It is hidden or unknown. The meaning of life is a secret to us all. We do not know it. It is forever hidden. To rid ourselves of the pain of not knowing if there is meaning at all, we find purpose. Apply that purpose to our identity, and that identity becomes a replacement for meaning. Therefore, we measure the meaning of our lives through a prescription. Depending on how well that identity or purpose is acted upon is a measure of ourself. An identity we associate with that our mind, our sanity, and our ego are reliant on us. Thus, secrecy is the basis for the formation of identity and meaning. As a way to unveil the secrets of life and the world, we find meaning and identity, pursue it, and exist while knowing life will forever be a secret and to continue anyway, and live on. As one continues in life, there will be attempts at removing the veil, as each idea is transformed from secret into knowledge that must be understood and dealt with. Throughout our lives, as we age, life becomes less of a secret, and that knowledge becomes wisdom. It is ultimately the difference between the known and the unknown that defines secrecy. The concealment of truths about the world or people. I am currently speaking to you from this anonymous status, a concealment of who I am. My true identity, in some sense. I do this because I place so little importance on it. Who I am is largely irrelevant, or detracting from the value derived from my ideas or my work. You do not need to know who I am in order to determine the validity or value of my ideas and the quality of my work, just as you do not need to know the creator behind a film to understand its quality. Since the apparent death of the author, if any interpretation of the work is to be believed, the intention of the author/artist, or their history, is irrelevant to determine quality or value. I believe it should stay that way. The secrecy of creators should be protected, to create with anonymity, that the work itself has no direct impact on the repercussions or whims of a social upheaval or upset. As often, art asks difficult questions is known to do. I've recently remembered the principles of Hone and Tateme, the true feelings of an individual and the social mask or representation, in some way separating how one behaves and how one thinks or outwardly expresses themselves. Tatame is like putting on a mask, an outward expression of oneself, while Hone are the true feelings, a secret which is kept to oneself, and only known to that individual. There will always be a barrier between the inner self and all outer experiences. But what it means to be human is often experienced through the inner self. Inward reflection and cognitive awareness of the self. When you keep the inner self a secret, you suppress a part of human existence to some extent. The inner self is a primary catalyst for behavior and ideas. The inner and outer self is an important distinction, as often the actual thoughts are more harmful when they expressed or perhaps are misguided, which is why Hone exists secret, while Tatame represents the external world. Or, not the external world, but the external representation of it, the facade of the internal self, to prove to society that there is a level of obligation or obedience to the external world, not reflective of the eternal self. There are times then actual thoughts are more harmful when expressed, though this leaves much of the external self to be manipulated by social behavior or context. As an American, we do not value this separation of the external, often viewing it as deception of one's true self or motive or intention, which is why we call people fake or plastic or otherwise ethically or morally corrupt. There are times when we feel that the external self is a facade of the internal self. It is my personal belief to shape the external to reflect the internal self as genuinely as possible. Externals indicate internal nature, as externals are a product of the inner thoughts. So, how we act externally represents our internal status. by corresponding or actual actions and the distance between them. By studying the external actions and behavior, it will also be more likely to indicate the internal, as one's self-conception or ego should be based most accurately by the distance in difference between them. Most ideally, that all external thoughts are honed to meet the internal. External expressions and internal thoughts are closely correlated. Often a poor mental faculty or incongruity with self-perception and actual perception may have negative consequences. The incongruency of feeling or thought with action often breeds doubt, neuroticism, and anxiety. In some ways, when the external self is not reflective of the internal self, there is a sense of doubt. There is a sense of, I wouldn't say morally corruptness, but a sense that something is wrong. Thus, conformity is often the propagator of incongruent behavior and ideals. When someone conforms, they shed their actual reason and directives, the thoughts of the internal self. The thoughts of the individual are supplanted for some higher order or for social acceptability. By shedding the need for conformity, true individual and creative thought can endure. My need for secrecy is because society has a limited view and value on critical thought, and perhaps what I might be discussing or promoting or saying. Most people would rather demonize which they do not understand as a way to undermine it, shame it, and excise all behavior deemed unacceptable from a society. My way of doing things may perhaps be odd to somebody. Thus, the need for my secrecy becomes all the more important because people do fear what they cannot understand. They don't understand why I am acting this way, why I am speaking this way, why I am thinking about the things I do, why I take life seriously. If they don't understand all this, if they don't understand why I'm using YouTube as a platform instead of, a book or a novel or whatever that they see as more accurate to their perception of my external relation. Or perhaps they are generally the general population too lazy to think critically because it is hard and difficult. Thus, the death of Socrates. The man society decided to remove from existence because what it saw was a stain, a challenge, a corruption to people or the power that society wielded. Thus, society decided to excise him. Yet he is now one of the most vital insights into Western philosophy. My need for secrecy stems from security. Despite or in spite of my ideas, my thoughts, and my actions, people will seek ill will towards all those they do not agree with. Anonymity and free thought combat the very forces of society who would make critical thinking an enemy or threat to their power, just as people would shame or attack those which create art that they do not like. That is not all people, of course, but it is known to happen. There are millions of people on this planet. Thus, anonymity and the protection of security provides a far more productive way to create for the creator themselves. They do not have the burden of caring what people in their personal lives may think of what they are doing. Anonymity and free thought combat the very forces of society who would make critical thinking an enemy or threat to their power. I suppose that goes for everything. Making an enemy of something you do not agree with. Or making an enemy of something you do not understand. Making an enemy in general is easier than trying to make friends with them or understand them. Just as snuffing out all opposition is seen as an ideal for those radicalized in thinking the extinction of ideas they disagree with rather than the expression of ideas is beneficial to society. In some ways, I want to encourage critical thinking in a society which lacks it. Secrecy helps protect me from a society that lacks this critical thinking. And if I outwardly oppose this society, in some ways I make an enemy of it. And what is the one thing that an enemy needs to undermine you, or tear you apart, or destroy you? That is information. Information which will undermine any poignant or purposeful ideas that could be expressed. On meaning. I've been searching for the meaning in my life, meaning in the work I do, the things I create, trying to find some purpose and a through line for my desire and my passion. Some ideas I can get behind as a rational explanation for myself, a rational explanation for my actions and what I do, what I ultimately will become or seek to become. Part of the search for inner meaning and the reason for my being here and speaking. After 3 months of reflection and meditation, I've realized the true reason I created this video and this channel to find meaning, recommit my vow to art, and keep making work that means something to me. Present my own ideas in hopes of gaining an increased understanding of the world and myself. I want to encourage others to think critically about their own life and others and enjoy long-form content that poses in opposition to the short-form content that does exist. A respite from the short attention span content that is ever-present and corrupting. This stems from my understanding that society has corrupted me in some ways in the past, and I imagine it has for many others. The nature of society and conformity is a threat to individual prosperity and creativity in America. The meaning I want to create for myself is the drive and motivation to better myself once more, and the meaning I want to create for my social interactions. My goal is to embrace meaning and critical thought. I want to let my words and my actions take on more profound meaning than in my life, perhaps. Meaning in a society which currently lacks it. I would have no desire to promote meaning and critical thought, have this be my meaning and purpose, if society did not inherently have it, or that it was widespread and present. Throughout the last several years of my life, and reflection on the many years I have lived, I have seen the continuously chaotic downward spiral of society and individuals which fail to have meaning. It's a society that has failed its sole purpose, to be composed of people with inherent beliefs and ideals and motivation and meaning in their lives. A slowly fading memory in the 248th year of the United States, which has forgotten its way. In some sense, I have lost faith. As society loses the meaning and purpose of a unified nation, there is no meaning in the chaos. Thus, I must erect some sort of meaning and faith in a meaningless and faithless society. I am a nonconformist. I do not believe in the ideas of the common people. I do not relate. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to be in a society without speaking of its inherent problems in nearly every facet of its design. To speak on matters such as meaning, and to willfully neglect the poor environment for the hindrance of critical thought would be short-sighted. Unfortunately, it is not necessarily society, but the people within it, which are perhaps most abhorrent to me. Due to the internet, all of humanity, humanity's worst and best, brightest and most mentally retarded, is accessible to all. I cannot in good conscience participate fully in a society and think positively of it, which I view as wrongful and abhorrent, without first standing strong and speaking out against it, in the hopes that other people may find meaning in my words and become aware of the dangers society permits. Thus, the promotion of individual ideas and nonconformance to what society holds as ideals, or perhaps lacks in ideals. Thus, meaning in a meaningless society, purpose where previously there was none before. I cannot fix society, but I can provide my thoughts and ideas. I can provide thoughtful discussion in the absence of thoughtful discussion. I can create something thoughtful and meaningful in a market that lacks these ideals. I can create artwork that perhaps has some value to somebody that provides them meaning somewhere. Or perhaps simply an escape, as art is the great escape that provides us all meaning in a meaningless life. Art perhaps being one of the most important things to forget where we are. I have been observing the world, how people behave, think, and derive meaning. I've watched countless YouTube videos. I have seen the current state of our culture and the people that inhabit this society. By examining life, examining society, and the mind, we may be closer to understanding the meaning of it all. Life itself is not meaningless, so we should not treat it as such. Art is not meaningless. Critical thought is not meaningless. Understanding the world, your own mind, and the purpose of life cannot be meaningless. Thus, there is meaning to life. If there is something in life that has meaning, even if life itself is meaningless, if there is something within that life, within that reality that holds meaning, it cannot be entirely meaningless. By meditating on the nature of life and meaning of the world is not something to neglect or forget in our busy lives. Often people seek philosophy or religion when they feel emotional or mentally vulnerable, yet when all is well, life is good. Where does that time for philosophy and learning reside? In idea, the subconscious, as theory becomes action and practical thought? There is no need for philosophy when everything is well? Some see philosophy as a distraction from their life. Perhaps some form of aid for their mental inadequacies or perceived mental inadequacies. Questions that society is not providing, found elsewhere. Perhaps in material goods, perhaps in a family situation, perhaps meaning simply in their own passions. Does perhaps that philosophy and these ideas exist in the subconscious? Perhaps, I do not know. I think the idea that philosophy is a distraction from life, that we should devote less time thinking and testing things. I think that idea is dangerous. And I have tested it. As the mind devolves and devotes less time to thinking and more to acting, more on actions, old theories begin to fail. Reality tests resolve that action alone cannot solve. If society used more of its power towards thinking and understanding, imagine the possibilities. Imagine if you yourself devoted more time to thinking rather than acting, perhaps on impulse, perhaps on passion, perhaps on the will of your own mind and your body. Conformity is the mind killer. As conforming to our society now means acting on a whim, impulsively, illogically, shortening our attention, becoming a slave to society, lowering your own abilities, intelligence, and capability for someone else's profit or gain, or even your own country's. I could continue on this diatribe on negative effects of culture and society and other people for a long time, as there are numerous problems that society has, but we do not have control over that. We do not have control over our society. We can only hope that individuals come together to combat the afflictions, and individuals can learn to combat their own afflictions and society's afflictions upon them as the external corrupts within us or inflicts upon us. Power of the individual and the power of the mind allows us to do so in overcoming challenges. A criticism of devoting an individual's time to philosophy is that it becomes meaningless once it is understood and researched. That once it is known, it no longer becomes useful to engage in this practice. A false assumption that the question of meaning is useless to one's goal, or that thinking about life ceases to benefit it. That it is not useful, that it lacks conclusion, that it becomes clouded or unintelligible. By this misunderstanding of what philosophy is and perhaps does, and overall the subject or field, truly, it relates to matters of thought itself, neither subject nor field. It relates to thought. Yet, those of us most plagued by thoughts see philosophy as a way to answer many lingering questions about the nature of reality, perhaps understanding the suffering of life and the suffering of others and the meaning of it. When I say meaning in this context, I'm speaking about what someone believes matters. It is the reason, the purpose, it is what's important. It is what gives you meaning. The meanings and representations of ideas is another meaning. It is the concept which primarily relates to understanding the concept or definition, the meaning of a word. What we find meaning in often composes our identity. So, on identity. The formation of identity often stems from the idea of the self, the sense of self, and the awareness of the self. So what is the self? I would perceive it as a tool, the defining aspect of the individual that defines the entity or person. Thus, the self is an accumulation of all experiences and ideas of the person. In some ways, I am expressing my identity. In some ways, this representation of me is my identity, as it is my thoughts and a sharing of my thoughts and experiences. The identity of the self is a categorization or a labeling to further understand and comprehend the abstract representation of the self. When we speak of self-awareness, it is often in reference to the idea of self-development, that the self can be controlled, and the knowledge or values understood or shaped to the conscious will of the person. An individual might embark on the conscious journey to become self-aware, like I have, to better conceive the self-conception of the individual or being, to better conceive the conception of the self or through assessments of traits and tendencies which provide the labels and categorizations for certain behaviors in the form of traits or identity associations. John Locke, who I will read from in just a moment, spoke on the idea of identity and regarding the establishment of a nation from foreign rule. Ideas of identity which sprang up, what it means to be an individual, and the personal identity during such a time, many began to reflect on as they became educated or lived long enough in life, which the capacity for reason and to reflect or establish themselves as individuals in a new nation. Just as a nation must found itself from the identity and conception of the self separate from established systems, but by people itself, and in America, particularly, a nation defined by the individual. People must also find individual understanding and identity. For individualism, freedom, and the idea of liberty promoted through development, through conception. John Locke viewed it in a way that people can think for themselves regardless of the environment or society which they exist in, and while not ruled or are governed or dictated by someone else. That thinking freely is a personal freedom that all people are capable of doing. Here is an altered quote that I will provide. Consciousness always accompanies thinking, and 'tis that makes everyone to be what he calls the self. Personal identity, the sameness of rational being. And as far as this, consciousness can be extended backward to any past action or thought, so far reaches the identity of that person. It is the same self now, it was then, and 'tis by the same self, with his present one that now reflects on it, that action was done. The same idea is posed in the ship of Theseus. It is the same ship. Is it the same ship? If it has been destroyed and rebuilt over and over again, is it the same ship as before? Can it carry that same name? As flesh and bone are torn apart and remade once more, is it still the same person? What composes the self, if not the things it is made of? Perhaps the transfer of the brain or the mind represents something that is perhaps wholly unique to the idea of the identity of the individual, more so than the biological or physical form it represents. Thus, the abstract representation of what someone is or who someone is often relies on abstract thinking, which can only be established by the brain. I suppose perhaps the soul, the spirit, the consciousness, these ideas that compose the primary struggle, the divide between the sense of self, what composes an individual and identity. My primary focus is the sense of self, the development of that facet of consciousness to acknowledge, transform, and understand. The struggle of identity and moreover labels or categories of definition is primarily why I chose this topic. For my own struggle with identity stems from being an artist. A category, a label, perhaps even a role in society, but truly something which provides me meaning, which is wholly unique and abstract. It is not related to the body. Thus, identity is often not the physical form of identity. Thus, it cannot be a material thing, but an abstract idea. While identity, in this sense, is a label or a vocation, perhaps, with being an artist, I describe my being an artist, something that is derived from my behavior and tendency towards creative thought, often action, an exploration of creativity rather than a position or role that is put upon by society, the external. Being an artist for me is an internal realization from many years of creative output tendencies and increased meaning I derive from the artistry. It is wholly abstract and wholly unique to myself. It is not related to a society. Thus, it is identity that is formed by the inner self, not by what society has determined. Perhaps you may adopt something society has determined for you. But is that truly representative of who you are? Does society know better than the individual? Or can you yourself determine your identity better than society could itself? The label of artist could perhaps better be described as creative, a creative, as artist tends to have the connotation of being a snob or in some way superior to those who do not share or partake of the art to the perceived degree of the highbrow internet artists. I say this because art carries the connotation of many personalities which define this label of artist. Often flamboyant and obnoxious, rude and demeaning, and wholly basing the idea of the artist on the ego. And that primarily being an artist is somehow above being a mason. I do not carry this idea with me at all. I have been making art for a very long time, and getting back into art once more, I have been witness once more to those who would define their whole life and identity with art, and call themselves artists even when they are the shittiest artists on the planet. It has to do with ego, the self-conception of the self. They would rather deceive themselves into thinking they are a good artist, perhaps, by associating their entire identity with it. So much so that they become video essay internet snobs. This goes for film and any other media where they pretend they are some bastion of intellectual prowess, demeaning others for their lack of insight into the field. Often artists online solely rely on their identity of art to define them, come off as intellectual snobs, which devolves into artistic elitism. As such, I dislike being associated as an artist. I dislike the labels, as identity is often a label because it is a fast and clear, effective shortcut to a description of the sense of self that we may define ourselves by. Being an artist is a label, for labels do not really define who I am, nor should we let our identity define who we are, as our identity should be a collective of all things, not singularly focused, because that would be an extreme and a lack of attention to other ideas and experiences that culminate in a strong, powerful identity. Or assumptions of what an artist is, truly defined by the external ideas, is more so a label or vocation than identity itself. It's a job. Thus, I try to focus on the internal understanding. It is far less chaotic. It is less, I would say, based on the external. I define myself as an artist internally. For me to arrive at being an artist as part of my identity, I asked myself many questions. What do I do? What do I make? Why do I create? To establish this internal realization of my action and therefore thought and the connection between them and how strong they are. To establish this internal realization that I am an artist. For purpose derived from the idea of this identity. I can ask myself what force drives me to search for meaning in creation. Is it natural or artificial? What is the true reason that I make art? Why I do anything at all? These questions test the identity and its validity. Thus, if the identity is true and identifiable as something I am, then I have self-categorized and understood myself. strengthening the sense of self, the sense of identity, and also meaning. This is what I am doing. This is what I have decided to do. This is what I have done. Thus, I have created a greater sense of self through action. The root cause of my identity. I believe it's the true reason I create artwork or continue to make things. What is the impetus, the force that drives me towards creation? This search for meaning through identity, I suppose. I suppose a creative might be a more apt definition. The problem is these sorts of identities are defined through external sources. A creative is a profession or job as an artist, or a creative. It is a role in society, while an artist merely means someone who is skilled or practices a particular task or occupation as a profession or hobby, not defined by society. I also chose this label because people understand what an artist is. Usually some bum who makes things or paints pretty pictures. Even when boiled down to its simplest understanding or most complex external understanding, I am still identifiable to others as an artist and to myself. An artist searching for meaning and purpose in my own identity. That is, my own identity. I seek an understanding of myself, and often through the art forms I try, and through this format of exploratory thinking. The problem I seek to solve is the hole inside of myself, something missing. This search for meaning and purpose and identity is what led me to create and express ideas, as this is my expression of the artistic identity. My vow to art is as much as my artistic identity that I have ever expressed before, except for in paintings, perhaps, or discussion with colleagues about art. Just as much as my other channel or other attempts at social media are an expression of other aspects of myself or my interests. So, if I have defined myself as an artist, what is my true purpose, my meaning in seeking out art? This gets into the meaning of art, or at least for myself, and why I make art. What is it that wills me to create? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I exist? Why do I create? What is my true will? Why do I continue? To answer briefly, I do all this because I seek to become a better person, to have a level of self-development and achieve an ideal and identity that I am proud of. To be a great artist, not just an artist or a poor artist. And I do this by measuring the quality of my work. Hopefully something that I am proud of, however short or fickle that feeling of may be of pride. I do this to learn, to be aware and understand through critical analysis. This analysis that has made me question my own existence and the value of it, and the value of my own artwork, to analyze and understand. Often self-critical of artwork, or analytical of your own artwork, or all ideas, to measure the value of my work and my experiences. Self-critical of every action I take, and the time I use, which is limited and, I suppose, finite. Reflecting on my life and every moment of it. Because there is value in self-reflection and the understanding of my being. At one point, I recently wrote, "Does it ever truly end, this agonizing pain? I ask myself once more if I can live with myself. Every waking moment, can I continue to live this way, live this life, or live at all? Is my life justified, my actions reasonable, or do I need another path, another life, another way, or another vow to take?" This search for identity leads me to art once more, philosophy once more, as I cannot live as a mindless being. I am dissatisfied, but can I ever be sated? Regardless of it all, I must continue. So, this vow to art, this vow to living, this vow to thinking, this vow to being and improving becomes something I must continue as an expression of my identity, once again as the focal point of my life, to explore creativity and art, and explore rational ideas, to escape this miserable existence. Perhaps a rational mechanism to supplant the boredom of life itself. I continue because eventually I will die. I seek to correct this lack of understanding until then. This concludes my writing and my speaking on these topics. This is a reflection on my purpose and these ideas, meaning, secrecy, and identity itself. I have been thinking about the true reason I want to make YouTube videos. What I truly want to express with my thoughts and my words and my future actions, besides self-development and awareness, yada yada, it is thinking. Perhaps critically thinking is an overused term and perhaps even a misunderstood term. I believe with this profound sense that the world has become more mindless, lacking in exploration of ideas, I felt it was right to use that as a driving force and impetus with my dissatisfaction with the state of the mind in the world or content on YouTube as a way to harness that hatred and create. I want to create a work that opposes the current nature of online media and content that permeates all online social media and other media. I want to promote within myself and others the importance of mindfulness and critical thought. This is a monologue of insight and reflection on the world and my philosophy towards life. This, in some sense, is my identity. Others may share their identity through images, catalog of shining moments in their life. I thought to myself, what greater identity to represent than the experiences and ideas I hold within myself and can express to others. I believe that to be a more beneficial expression of identity than to participate in the, I want to say, deplorable manner in which people decide to express their identity or perhaps even captivate their own meaning in life. This same dissatisfaction with life led me to the desire of creating more artwork. Why not let it also be the reason I make YouTube videos and all other kinds of work that have spun from my disdain and hatred for the nature of the universe? An issue I can struggle with and create from till the end of time, or at least until my death. Understanding art is controlling and taming the wildest of chaotic thoughts an artist could possibly express, and choosing to hone or focus that will into an ideal, harness it, and create. The skill of an artist is truly just the refinement of man's capacity for controlling chaos. At least, I believe that is what all great artists seek to achieve. Skill. Acting on the nature of reality and man, abstract and tangible objects, merely a canvas for an artist. Art is not reality, but a refinement of it. Artists have the ability to refine all things, with great art merely another valiant effort at seeking to refine and hone the chaos of the world. Chaos being the ideas, abstract thought, and the realization of perception itself. Chaos being the external world. And the inner self, perhaps, receiving that information, translating it, and bringing it out into the external world in a greater light than it was before. Thinking and rationalizing. For man is supposed to not succumb to the nature of the world and accept all things, but to overcome them. The greatest asset that man has is the mind, that can overcome the world and themselves and the physical limitations of their body. For there is an internal and external war, one that does not end, that has no apparent victor, and throughout life must be faced, or otherwise accept defeat, cower before it, or shrivel and die. What life do you want to live? For if it were not secrecy, for meaning and my identity, I would not be fighting or speaking. By expressing myself now, I am expressing the battle of the self and the battle against the world. I don't believe many things are right in this world, but we cannot learn the truth without speaking on it. And trying things that have not been done before, or at least things I have not done myself before. And thinking in ways that have not been thought before. My vow to art goes beyond creative pursuits. That concludes my thoughts, my writings, my monologue about these ideas. In some ways, I don't know if this is the right way to convey ideas. I don't know if what I'm doing is the right thing to do. I don't know why I am doing this entirely. But I think throughout this, I'm trying to explore my own personal attachment to expressing myself in this way. And in some ways, I'm still really struggling with the goals I am apparently repeating throughout. A reclarification of my purpose and ideas, because I don't feel it is very clear to myself or to the viewer, to you, what exactly I am trying to do with these videos. This is a new way of doing things. This is something I have never done before. This is something I have not seen done before, perhaps. A strange conglomerate of ideas and almost journal-like thoughts that form not an essay, but a casual log. A session of someone's pure meditative and inner thoughts on something. As often, it is hard to find true inner thoughts of people online because they feel the need to shift and change their internal thoughts to the external world. A lot of times people express on social media not what they actually think. That's exactly what I'm doing here, what I actually think. I think so many people shape their ideas to the external world, whether they know it or not. They think they are independently minded, but they only choose another side and regurgitate or parrot those ideas, not internally reflecting on them. It is easy to attach yourself to ideas as it is to attach yourself to the world and the material objects inside of it. I don't blame people for doing so. It is natural. It is human. I do it myself. I don't think I am unique. I don't think my ideas are actually valuable. I think they are worthless. In some ways, this is perhaps a waste of time. Everyone's time. My own, yours. A waste of breath. A waste of time. I am one step closer, perhaps an hour closer to my death, and this is what I decide to do. It's an interesting struggle I face, because in some ways, I do not know if what I say matters. I do not know if my existence truly matters, yet I want to leave some sort of legacy behind. Not just my work, not just my artwork, not just the things I have physically built in places and locations, but things I could cultivate in my mind. And in others' minds, perhaps encouraging discussion and ideas on a deeper level could be something I would be proud of. I have built things in physical locations. I have made my mark on the locations I have visited. I have created memories. I have created a family and relationships and partners and friends, but I have not cultivated one thing, and that is perhaps not a following, not a group, not some sort of cultivation of external acceptance, but a cultivation of like-minded individuals who share my passion for, whether be it art, a passion for thinking, a passion for meditating, a passion for sitting down with ideas and escaping from the very, I want to say, meaningless forms of media we entertain ourselves with. I have been dealing with the idea that I have consumed too much. I am consuming far too much. I have been buying a lot of things I shouldn't be buying. I have been entertaining myself with shows and television far more than I should be. I've been sick recently, and I've been watching a lot of shows and TVs and movies and playing video games, and I think to myself, why don't I make something? Perhaps this is that something I can be satisfied with. I have made art, I have made physical drawings, I have made sketches, but I have not made a culmination of work. Perhaps one day I'll write a book with my ideas, but perhaps a culmination of my knowledge and ideas, which for the longest time of my life I thought my ideas were valueless and worthless, and my individual thoughts had no say in the matter. My thoughts did not influence or affect others in a deeper level than at face value, perhaps. But this is something different. This goes beyond it goes beyond what I am easily capable of expressing, as this is quite difficult. This is a challenge, and in some ways, I believe more fruitful for myself as a form of self-development and meditation, perhaps easing my mind from the racing thoughts I have on a daily basis. An escape, much like my own artwork, much like artwork in general and entertainment, an escape. Perhaps my own words and tangents on life can be an escape. That means my words are of some value, just like my art is of value because it provides a level of escapism from this life, to escape the suffering of the world. As I often think, I suppose I should go into what inspired this idea. I have been thinking of Arthur Schopenhauer and the idea that life is suffering, and mostly accepting a lot of these truths, accepting that life is suffering and choosing not to give in to the external world and external pleasures, much like the Eastern philosophies and monks and Buddhism, to not give in to external things. However, that is not possible for mere mortals. For gods are truly the only people who can remove all desire. We are merely human. We are pathetic ants upon a world forced to survive in our environment and limited by our own body. Thus we consume, we seek to create things, we seek to make life less full of less suffering in the world. And we seek to escape from it. That is what humanity is naturally capable of. Humanity is not naturally capable of rejecting all desires, all formation of thoughts, rejecting the world itself or existence itself. We are not easily capable of that. We are human. As far as my artwork itself, the thing I have been drawing as the background for this monologue, this meditation on life, it is a tree, I think, hopefully. Hopefully it appears as a tree to you. It's not great. I don't like it. I think it's worse than my first drawing. It's worse than the first drawing I made for the first time in 3 years. How did that happen? And it's perhaps because of my lack of attention towards art for the last several months and my focus on ideas. I have not been practicing. I have not been developing as much as I should be. I did sketch some trees. I did practice a little, but not as much as I needed to drastically improve my impressions and capabilities. Though by far, this is one of the best trees I've drawn, though it is far from ideal. And I suppose that is what I try to make when I draw an ideal. I did not succeed in that effort. Next time, maybe I will.